This weekend, they filmed themselves terrorising Zamzam camp, setting fire to people's shacks. Sudan's Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, raping and killing, spreading fear wherever they go. They attacked because a militia allied with their enemy, the Sudan Armed Forces, had taken up positions in the camp. But militiamen weren't their main target. They attacked the only remaining health facility in the camp, shooting 9 health workers from Relief International, the last NGO in Zamzam.
Around midnight, I received a call from our guard that unfortunate incident happened and all of our 9 staff, they were killed on a brutal attack, and on spot they were shooted and all collapsed.
The sound of mourning in Zamzam camp. But the same sound has echoed across Sudan for 2 brutal years as the RSF and SAF and the militias they've recruited persecute the people they claim to protect. Today it's the people of Zamzam fleeing, but Sudanese have fled from hundreds of towns, camps and villages. 13 million have been displaced, maybe more. Hence today's conference in London, the aim of which was to boost international aid to Sudan and push the antagonists into a peace process.
Very simply, we have got to persuade the warring parties to protect civilians, to let aid in and across the country, and to put peace first.
Very simply, who might lead peace talks?
It must be Sudanese-led, Sudanese-owned, the political dialogue process.
But where are the Sudanese? Neither of the belligerents was invited. Instead, their regional backers and quartermasters were at the table. Sudan's putative president, General Burhan, returned to Khartoum last month after the Sudan Armed Forces drove the RSF out of the capital. His deputy is furious that the United Arab Emirates, which supports and reportedly arms the RSF, was invited to the London conference.
This is a foreign aggression that ought to be condemned by the international community rather than inviting them to participate in conferences that ought to solve the problem of Sudan. They will actually have to be condemned and then have to be told that this is wrong, what you are doing in Sudan is wrong. People talk about the humanitarian issues, and UAE is brought there. Who is killing these people?
Well, actually, both sides are killing civilians. The RSF fled Khartoum across the dam over the White Nile. But soldiers reportedly accused some ordinary people who remained of being collaborators and killed them. Civilians who've reached neighbouring countries say they were trapped between the anvil and the hammer.
When we were in Khartoum under the RSF, it was torture. My daughter and I locked ourselves in the apartment. They stole our money and phones, so it was difficult. But when the army arrived, they didn't know whether you were just a civilian living under RSF or a collaborator. And if they decided you were a collaborator, it was over for you.
1 million Sudanese have fled to Chad. 30 million inside and outside the country desperately need aid. Today's pledge by the UK to provide a further £120 million will help a little. But not enough money is being donated, and anyway the belligerents block and steal aid. And until regional countries stop fueling this conflict, no conference or goodwill gesture will bring it to an end.
Lindsay Hilson reporting there. Now, earlier I spoke to Sarah Quetta, a documentary filmmaker who has spent the last 2 years covering the conflict and is currently on Sudan's border with Chad. I began by asking her what the situation was there and what she was hearing from people who are fleeing the violence.
Yeah, in the border here is pretty crowded. Every day you have still family that are coming across. This morning I was at the border and I met a family that was fleeing from Fasher. There was an attack in Fasher. Is a city that is almost like 3 days traveling from here, from the border. There was an attack on a refugee camp, and a lot of family are fleeing from Fasher, from Niala, from different towns in Darfur. But also people are fleeing from Khartoum. It's a 25 days journey coming here from Khartoum. And they are devastated. They are fleeing with their kids. It's mainly women and children that are fleeing. They say that men are not allowed to cross. And majority of the people are exhausted. They are escaping the brutality of this war that is ongoing for 2 years right now. They are arriving with nothing, almost nothing. They are arriving with, few clothes, and sometimes they arrive here with no food, no water.
Yeah, I mean, you have been in and out of Sudan since the conflict began, specifically in El Geneina. What is your experience of the areas under RSF control?
All the institutions have been looted. City are, trying to rebuild, but there is no government in place. So despite the fact that RSF is trying to rebuild a de facto government under the area that is under their control, there is nothing running concretely. So everything that's coming through Chad to Darfur, like humanitarian aid that is coming through, this is what people rely on.
So the needs are enormous, and we've seen plenty of criticism of international inaction on this war. What is the feeling inside the refugee camps? What are people saying? Do they believe that the world is listening, that the world cares?
No, definitely this crisis is also a crisis of the international community and the response of the international community to stop this war. It's clear that people here, they are hoping to return back to their country. They don't want to stay here. They don't want to live in refugee camps. They want to start a life again in El Geneina, in Niala, in the other cities. But there is no way that they can go back if justice is not, if they can find justice, if their community are not find peace and stability. So for the past 2 years, they have been living here in refugees camp where they have no access to education, for example. I met kids that haven't gone to school for the past 2 years. There is also very little access to food. And the little food that they receive, sometimes they sell it in the local market, to get some money to buy other commodities. Basic commodity, like sugar, like oil, really like every single thing here is lacking. And people are trying to organize themselves, or trying to resist, or trying to be resilient. But there is very little aid arriving.
Sarah Creta, thank you very much for talking to us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, I'm now joined by Dr. Eva Khair, who is a British Sudanese medical doctor and also the founder of the Sudan Transnational Consortium, a network of Sudanese professionals working to draw attention to this war, and Khalid Omar Youssef, who is a cabinet minister in the Sudanese civilian government and is part of the SMOOD alliance of political groups led by the former Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok. Thanks very much to both of you for coming in. Let me start with you, Dr. Khair. I mean, this is a terrible tragedy. The country's been there before. It's particularly bad this time. We're now into the third year of fighting. It's a good idea to have a conference in London. It draws attention to the conflict. Does it make any difference at all?
Well, I think the difference that we would like to see to call this conference a success is for the immediate violence that is happening right now in Darfur to stop. That has been raging for the past few days. We have it clear. We have a massacre unfolding in Zamzam camp.
So you want the violence to stop, obviously. The money that's been pledged, I think it's more than £800 million of aid. Will that aid, if it materializes, even get to the right places where it's needed if the violence continues?
Well, there was a conference last year in Paris hosted by President Macron, and the funds from that conference have yet to be fully dispensed. That is one ask the international community is making.
So that money hasn't arrived anywhere where it's needed?
Certainly not at scale. And, we would expect to see that. And of course, what's important about funding isn't just that money is promised or even that it starts to get dispensed, but that it's localized and it goes to the local responders.
Khalid Omar Youssef, the fact that the warring factions weren't invited, they weren't at the table today in London, does that make the conference futile?
The conference, as far as we know, it's about the international coordination around Sudan. So unfortunately, Sudan now is hugely divided, not only just between the two fighting parties, but also the civilians and the communities are divided. There is no legitimate government in Sudan since the coup in 2021. So for the objective of the meeting is to achieve a better coordination between the internationals It's okay not to have the warring party, but of course, if the participants of the conference agreed on an effective mediation, of course, it is important to engage the civilians and the warring parties in any upcoming talks.
But this is not a peace process, is it? Not even close.
Exactly. This is only a conference to coordinate between the internationals around the humanitarian and political tracks.
Who has the power, if anyone at all, to try and enforce some kind of settlement?
Well, essentially, we have obviously the warring parties themselves, and it's not a binary. It's not just two actors.
Sure.
It's a multitude of actors.
It's very fragmented, isn't it?
It's very fragmented, and what we're seeing is that there are backers of that conflict regionally, and of course, those backers also don't follow binary patterns.
Yeah.
They also have stakes and relationships, strategic partnerships with different sides, and so that's something to be considered. Some parties are losing some influence, others are gaining influence. So it's a bigger geopolitical piece.
Do the Americans need to be at the table as they were, back in 2005 in order for there to be a settlement?
The role of the Americans is really important. The Americans were an active part of the CPA in 2005 as well. They initiated with the Saudis the Jeddah track after the start of this war. And hopefully, not the American only, but the whole international community were together to put an end for this catastrophe.
Because America talks both to Saudi Arabia and to UAE, to the United Arab Emirates. They have traction with both sides.
Exactly. The role of the American is needed to speak with the regional actors. The role of the American is needed as well to contribute to the humanitarian assistance. The role of the American as well is needed to put pressures on the two fighting parties. Without sufficient and extreme, actually, pressures on the two fighting parties, this war will continue. So these pressures are really needed.
It's in its third year. We kind of talk about the story every 3 months or so, and every time it gets worse. I mean, there's just no end to this, is there? Is there a point in the fighting where the fighting gets so bad or the suffering gets so bad that the warring factions might say enough is enough?
Well, the fighting is very bad. What could be more ironic and devastating than the biggest massacre in Jenena proportions occurring as this conference is being convened? This conference had an opportunity.
This is the massacre in Zamzam camp.
Absolutely. This conference had an opportunity to show that diplomacy, that international cooperation still works. We haven't seen that. Satellite images still show that there are fires and the camp has been, for all intents and purposes, cleared.
Do you think there should have been more emphasis on this massacre happening today while they were talking in London?
There should have been a podium moment. There should have been live footage of the people leading this conference on David Lammy to stand up and show that enough is enough, that this would not be tolerated and that there will be consequences. We haven't seen that. So, the hosts, the backers and the conflict parties all had a part to play in that.
There is a real danger, is there not, that Sudan will once again split. It split before, but it could split again, but this time not north and south, east and west.
Unfortunately, now there is a de facto partition in Sudan.
So it's already split.
In Sudan. There are territories that under the control of SAF, other under control of the RSF. The SAF already, they have their governing structure there. The RSF are forming their government structure in the territories that under their control. The Sudanese people divided. And Sudan now is not just a threat for the Sudanese. It is beyond that. It's already started to disturb the whole situation in the region, in South Sudan, in Chad, and beyond. The active activities of the extremists now in Sudan will pose the threat for the whole region. So for the world, Sudan is a global problem, and there is a need for quick intervention to stop this war.
It borders 8 countries. So just very briefly, what happens in Sudan doesn't stay there. It does explode in the region.
It does indeed. And I think it's important not to over-securitize the situation when it comes to Sudan. Displacement causes insecurity. Scarcity of food and other types of vulnerability and violence caused instability. And so we need to put a stop to that for the sake of the Sudanese and for the sake of the region.
We hear you. Dr. Eva Khair, Khalid Amma Youssef, thank you very much indeed.